Vinod Busjeet, a debut-making writer of the novel Silent Winds, Dry Seas, about Indians in Mauritius, has been basking in the warmth of critical acclaim. This is the first major novel in English about Indians in the French-speaking Mauritius, where Indians were first brought between 1721 and 1810, some 12,000 of them, as virtual slaves. 3 centuries since their first arrival, people of Indian descent now constitute 65% of this Indian Ocean island nation's population of some 1.3 million people. They are like an Indian outpost in the Indian Ocean between India and Africa. Their stories have been told to much critical success by Mauritian Indians writing in French, but it fell upon Busjeet, a retired career professional at the International Finance Corporation and the World Bank, to write a slice of that history for the first time in English. The title, Silent Winds, Dry Seas, is derived from a once frequently used Hindi phrase, Hawa Band Samundar Sukha Rahe. It was a reference to the often angry elements on the island as they manifested in cyclones and high tides. Vinod Busjeet tells his story from the standpoint of a fictional but plausibly real family of the Bhushans. He spoke to Mayank Chhaya Reports. From international finance to literature, explain the transition.
Well, actually, after retirement, I decided to get into screenwriting.
I see.
And so my first attempt was screenwriting, and I pitched my screenplay to Hollywood. But I realized very fast that, Hollywood favors the young. And even if my screenplay gets purchased, it doesn't mean it will be made into a movie. And even if it's made into a movie, it may not hit the screen.
True.
So then I said, well, I've always thought people have always told me I write well. I kind of looked at my life and tried to make sense of it, and I thought a novel would be, I thought of a memoir at first, a memoir to kind of delve into sort of the meaning of, my life in a way. And then from there, it turned into a novel. So that's how I moved from finance to literature, yes.
I see. It's interesting you should mention that you wanted to do a memoir. Are there elements in the novel which are autobiographical? I mean, there always are. For most
cases. I mean, there's a bit of autobiography. I mean, a substantial part of autobiography. There are invented events. There are characters which have merged into one, to simplify things. To give an example, I have 4 siblings, and the protagonist, the narrator in the novel, does not have any.
Right.
I have many cousins, and the only cousin you see there is one cousin. So,
true.
And I have also compressed events over time, events that take place over a year. I make them happen in a period of 3 days.
Right.
And that is most evident in the chapter on Cyclones, which I have, the chapter, which is in fact the title chapter called Silent Winds.
Right.
So these are, fiction allows you to do those things, but also it allows you to, delve a bit deeper into the human conditions. You have to go beyond your life, kind of, to reflect on.
To digress a bit, I'm curious, what was your screenplay about? Were you pitching a similar story?
Totally different subject. I was very struck by the photographs of this Brazilian photographer, Sebastião Salgado.
Sure.
His work on the miners in Brazil. And so I took 2 trips to Brazil, one of which was with my daughter, and we went on the Amazon, and I visited various places in Brazil. So it was really about. It was set in Brazil, and it was inspired by the fate of sort of the miners in that country.
I see.
Yeah.
This is rather speculative and perhaps even silly, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Would you still have turned writer had your family not left India for anywhere else?
Would I have turned to writing?
Right. And there is a reason I'm asking. My point being that Mauritius, in your case, perhaps gave a sharper relief to your stories, which may not possibly have
Yeah,
happened
I
in.
think it definitely did, because there was, it was only my goal was not only to try to make sense of my life, but I also wanted to make Mauritius better known in this part of the world. I was struck by how little Mauritius is known here. It's quite well known in Europe,
Right.
but I thought if this novel would be a good way to trace the story of Mauritius. It's a coming-of-age story of the protagonist and of the island of Mauritius.
Right. The title of your book comes from the expression used by Indians in Mauritius in Hindi, which says "Hawa band, samundar sukha re," which
Yes.
I suppose it's a reference to the elements such as cyclones in Mauritius, which are rather frequent. Tell me a bit about whether you heard as a child "Hawa band sukha, samundar sukha re."
I actually heard it as narrated in the novel. My uncle would come home.
Uncle Ram, you mean?
Uncle Ram.
Right.
He would come home, and he would go to bed with those words. Now, where he picked it up, I don't know. But so it was like a refrain in the household. We lived in the same house. He lived on one side of the house. We lived on the other. But I could hear him, and I used to go with him sometimes when he would be drinking, and I would hear him all the way.
Your family came to Mauritius some 100 years ago?
In 1853, actually.
1853, and came from where? Bihar?
And they came from Bihar, and took the ship in Calcutta.
I see.
And I have actually, if I look for it, we have records in Mauritius. The British kept good archives, and I know he was. My ancestor was on the father's side, was 17 years old when he arrived in Mauritius. He had a mark on his left shoulder. On my mother's side, the ancestor came a bit later. I think it was more towards 1873, and at the age of 19. So I sometimes wonder, at the age of 17, it must have been quite an adventure, quite harrowing. He must have been very strong, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there any sense in you how they were treated? They came as, I presume, indentured labor, right?
They came as indentured laborers. It was a harsh life. It was essentially what had happened is the enslaved people, when they were freed, they did not want to work on the sugarcane plantations anymore. And the French planters in Mauritius asked the British who owned the island, who ruled the island, to bring in labor from India. So the conditions of life were very harsh. However, one thing which the Indians had, which kind of were denied to the former enslaved people, we kept our religion, our identity, our names, our culture, and so if you go to Mauritius today, You have both the Hindus and the Muslims have kept many of their traditions.
Why do you think that was? What prompted the French to do that?
No, that was the British.
Sorry, the British.
The British took over. The British took over the island in 1810.
Right.
And they agreed to respect actually French laws and customs and so forth. So the French planters and the enslaved people kept, they kept the French language and so on. And the Indians, when they came, it was a different regime. Slavery had been abolished.
Right.
And the Indians, they clung to Hinduism and Islam. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just that they didn't call it slavery for all practical purposes.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of letting the Indians keep their religious traditions and culture and so on, that we were allowed to do. There was no major attempt to evangelize us.
Yeah. No, it strikes me even while we are talking that perhaps that was a pretty crafty, intelligent strategy on their part, because it keeps people calm and grounded, not too rebellious, as long as they have the fallback of their culture and religion, right?
It's interesting. Let me tell you something I learned about Jamaica. Right. Bob Marley.
Right.
Now, there was a documentary on Bob Marley which I saw in Washington, and the sister of Bob Marley was here, and there was a discussion on the role of Ganja in Jamaica and the Rastafarians' religion. And I Googled, apparently in Jamaica, the British, they favored the use of Ganja.
Sure.
Even there was a report from the British Colonial Office, the medical officer of the British Colonial Office, who said, this Ganja keeps the Indians docile and
let them be high. Yeah.
Exactly, let them be high. However, when the Rastafarians embraced Ganja, the position of the British government changed.
I see.
Because then those Ganja taking people were becoming rebellious. So it could be, yeah. I think your explanation is it's a plausible hypothesis, I would say. And it is something worth. I think I will tell that to my historian friends.
Please do.
And maybe they can explore that hypothesis.
I'm almost convinced that could be the case, because why make it more difficult than it already is? Let them be distracted by those things, and they want.
Yeah, actually, did you read the interview with the Paris Review?
Yeah.
The interviewer did say that the Hindus kind of went to their rituals. That gave them a sense of grounding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true.
You need those rituals to keep you alive, to enable you to deal with your situation.
Exactly. It's a great distraction. There is great logic to it.
Well, that sounds like an atheist, though.
I have no sense of religion at all.
We are on the same wavelength on that.
Oh, wonderful. You sound like your Uncle Ram, but we'll come to that later. There is a passing reference to dark skin and its inherent societal challenges, including finding husbands. How prevalent was color prejudice among early Indians in Mauritius, you think?
Well, I don't know, but when I grew up in the 50s, it was clear, a fair-skinned person was preferred in a marriage, right? And I would say even now probably it's the same. I haven't been to Mauritius for the last, since 2013. I think there is, I don't say color prejudice, but color preference. I mean,
it's a euphemism, sure. Why not?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that it is prevalent. Not only it's prevalent, I think, among the Indians, but also among what we in Mauritius, the creoles, the mixed African white blood. There are various degrees of whiteness or darkness.
Absolutely. No, it's amazing how perfected that prejudice has become. India has, of course, in many ways pioneered a lot of those things, so we are used to it.
Yeah, we don't like it, but it's there. It's very much.
It's very much a part of India even now. There's just no denying it.
I remember seeing matrimonial ads.
Absolutely.
Asking for fair partners.
Yeah. You introduce domestic abuse almost incidentally when Vishnu's father flings a pan at his mother.
Yeah.
You then bring in another Indian family, the Desais, where the husband, Mr. Desai, is a criminal abuser. In fact,
that is actually autobiographical. That part. I actually saw this woman.
I suspected that, So let's talk a bit about how was domestic abuse rather prevalent.
I would say in the old days it was prevalent among all communities in Mauritius.
Okay, and so Kajal that you talk about, the young woman married to Mr. Desai, who was much younger than Mr. Desai.
Much younger. Yes.
You say it's drawn from real life.
My mother and I, we still talk about it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And that real life woman also died like that?
Yes. And I think of Medusa, the Gorgons. I can see her with her hair disheveled and coming back and forth like this on the bed with a pain inside. Yeah.
Oh, I see. It's rather personal for you.
It's quite personal, that incident, that episode.
I see. And what happened to the? I'm sure they were not the real life Desais, but that family, which was the perhaps inspiration. What happened to them? Are they still in Mauritius?
I think they are still in Mauritius, and in that case of the conversion, that's.
I see.
Yeah.
The Bhushans in your novel were the first descendants of Indian coolies who had owned a horse carriage, or horse carriages rather, in the south. You write that many Hindus commented on the way, meaning Bhushans flaunted their horse carriages, almost behaving or aping the whites. In your childhood, how widespread was the desire among Indians to be more white adjacent than closer to the more indigenous population?
I think, the desire was not so much to be white, but the desire was to show off your success.
Okay.
I don't think you can't say of the Indian, I use the term Indian, so the Muslims and Hindus in Mauritius, they aspire to whiteness. I think they aspire to the material improvement. So it's the human desire to show off, really. That's what it is.
I see.
Yeah.
Mauritius's population is barely, 1.27 million?
It's about 1.3 million,
65% happen to be Indians. That means in many sense of the word, it's an Indian outpost in the Indian Ocean.
It's of the 65%, they're Hindus and Muslims.
Yeah. Sure, but essentially Indian. So how has their culture developed since they first arrived between 1721 and 1810? Some 12,000 of them as virtual slaves.
In the French period, the Indians who were there in the French period up to 1810. The first group actually. The French brought slaves, but also brought some free people from Pondicherry, quite a few artisans and so on. And then slaves were brought, 1810, up to the abolition of slavery, happened. So your question was, what was there?
How did that evolve? Indian culture within the milieu that they found.
Indian culture, actually, you could say, flourished in a way because we kept all the traditions, not only the sartorial traditions, but religion. We celebrate Mahashivratri, we celebrate Diwali. Some of my Indian friends tell me that some of the celebrations we do even to a greater extent than in India. We have Ganga Asnan.
Right.
So I would say the the coolies kept Hinduism and Islam alive.
Speaking of which, is the term coolie not considered pejorative?
No, it is considered pejorative now. For instance,
Right.
In one of the chapters, I have
Right.
one uncle telling the father, you're behaving like a coolie. Yeah,
Right.
coolie is pejorative, yes.
Right. Between Creole and French, as in languages, how did English arise, and what has been its influence on Mauritian literature? I ask specifically because yours is the first English novel of its kind out of Mauritius.
Yeah, I would say Mauritian literature written in French has made its mark in
Right.
the Francophone world and also through translations in the US. You have Ananda Devi, Natasha
Right.
Apana, you have the Nobel Prize laureate, Leclisio. So we've done that. We have some English, sort of English medium writers as well, but sort of they have not crossed over to the US, right? So this, my novel would be the first. In terms of languages, in Mauritius, everyone speaks Creole, which is mostly French, mixed with Indian Hindi words
I see.
and Arabic words and so forth. Creole is very much like what Urdu was.
Oh, I see.
The way Urdu developed,
Right.
that's the way Creole developed in Mauritius. And all the daily newspapers in Mauritius are mostly in French. That gives
Right.
you an idea of how French culture is very much ingrained in Mauritius. So English is kind of the language, it's the administrative language, it's the institutional language. It's not the way it is in India, where you have someone at the University of Mauritius has remarked that the Indians there is an Indian way of writing English. There is a South African way of writing English,
Right.
but there is we can't say the same about Mauritius. So it is primarily an administrative language. We are fluent in it, but
Right.
we wouldn't speak it the way like the elite in India does.
I see. Do you speak Creole?
Yeah, I mean everybody in Mauritius speaks Creole. That's the language. I spoke Bhojpuri
Oh, I see.
fluently until the age of 7 or 8.
अभी भी बोलते हैं आप?
थोड़ा समझता हूँ.
अच्छा अच्छा.
Enough to I can watch a Bollywood movie quite
Okay.
easily. Yeah. But to
Tell
speak
me,
it is difficult.
tell me what would be the translation of your novel's title in Creole?
Silent winds drive seas. So let me. Good question.
Sorry to yeah.
Make
because
you
I'm-
no,
I'm-
it's good because I have been away for so many years. So Jivan tranquille. Jivan is le vent. Jivan tranquille, la mer sec.
Oh, that sounds so much more compelling.
Jivan tranquille, la mer sec.
Oh, I see. Very interesting.
And let me go back to the situation of Hindi in Mauritius.
Yeah.
Prior to independence in '68, Hindi was taught in the primary schools, but it did not have the status it has today. Today, like in my own family, my younger siblings, they are more fluent in Hindi.
I see.
And the very youngest one can write and read it as well. So in Mauritius, Twitter, you'll find a resurgence of Hindi.
I see.
And other Oriental languages. Huh?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. How have the influences of the Arabs, the Dutch, the French, and the British shaped the way Indians evolved in Mauritius?
The Dutch have there's no, I would say, not much of not no influence at all
I see.
culturally.
Okay.
The French, well, we the Mauritians of Indian origin, we all speak French. We are all the literature we read French literature. We listen to French music. So we are francophone.
Right.
The leading, as I said, today the leading novelist in the French language in Mauritius, we have Natasha Apana and Ananda Devi are of Indian origin, and they are Mauritian writers, and French is kind of we are fluent in it.
Have you considered your novel getting translated into French by you or Creole by you?
I didn't translate it by me because I have not written it for a long time.
I see.
However, I am hoping that it gets translated and that it's published in France.
Right. Yeah. There are some interesting terms that you use. For instance, there is Bombay to decide those Indians who came from.
You would call them Marathi.
Marathi, yeah, sure. Unlike Biharis, they were more skilled, I think, right? Those who came from Bombay.
They tended to be the goldsmiths, they tended to. They are more. You don't see as many of them in the sort of sugarcane fields,
right?
And they tend to be more cityfied.
And was there any inherent tension between the Biharis and those who came from Bombay because of the class differences? No. Okay. I'm rather fascinated by even, for instance, the Caribbean Indians in Suriname and elsewhere.
Yeah.
There is a funny reference to that you make to Uncle Ram, pointing out a priest in a dhoti.
Yes.
Running at a bus terminal. He talks about how his dhoti is flapping and you see his eggplant dangling, etc. Was sartorial evolution from the traditional Indian Hindu to a Western suit a sort of a cultural rite of passage for some Indians?
No, I think everybody wears a suit in Mauritius. Everybody. Okay. But the interesting things about the dhoti is today, an Indian wedding today, well, I guess I assume it's the influence of Bollywood.
Right.
So the Indian groom today, the Hindu groom,
right?
He is dressed like like those Maharajas. They now it's much more flashy, So I think the Uncle Ram's attitude to the dhoti was more that the dhoti was associated with peasant life.
Right.
He would have gladly worn, what you see today, what the grooms wear today.
I see.
Yeah.
He appears to be a natural disruptor of antiquated traditions and beliefs.
Yes.
Were people like him in real life in sizable numbers in
Rare, very rare.
Rare.
Uncle Ram types were rare. He flaunted tradition. He, I would say, in a way, he's larger than the community.
I see.
To me, he affirms the right of the individual vis-a-vis the community. That's what it is. For me, that's what he stands for. Yeah. In the same way as in the chapter where I deal with the ethnic riots, you have this Creole character who wears the dhoti in defiance of his community.
Right.
So both Uncle Ram and Tonton Georges are, to me, individuals who are willing to defy the community and stand up for what they believe.
Do you think the Indians in Mauritius now have absolutely lived down their rather cruel past?
Lived down, meaning?
I mean, a lot of them descended from versions of slavery. Of course, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
But are there any scars or marks or even memories that people, even this younger generation, talk about, or they are resentful about?
It's interesting. When one of my brothers-in-law heard about my novel, he told me, I have stories to tell you about my father, about my grandfather. You should write about them.
I see.
And then he told me all those, stories of how they suffered. So you have, I think you have those. I mean, these are people who are my age who kind
Right.
of have memories. But I'm not sure that the younger generation, I think, is moving on.
Right.
Mind you, Mauritius has, well, there are a lot of, still are some economic problems in Mauritius. I think the Creole community, for instance, has been left behind. That is an issue that has to be tackled. But by and large, I would say material conditions have improved.
I see.
So those memories, they are found in novels, I guess. They are found. I mean, the younger generation, they I don't think they're as conscious of
I see. What was the extent of fraternization or even mixing up through love or marriage or both between the Indians and the Creoles?
Very limited, as you can sense in the
Right.
novel. It's becoming now. There's more of it. I mean, but there's more of it. I think not only between Hindus and other communities. It's happening, throughout the island among all the communities. However, I would say still limited. I think I've seen more of it in Trinidad, for instance, and in Guyana. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned that the Creoles feel they've been left behind in some sense. The fact that Indians constitute 65%, and the fact that they have dominated the power structure, to what extent the Creoles blame them?
I think quite a bit, and I think they have a case. I think. Yeah.
So there are tensions between the two.
I don't think there are tensions. Tensions occur when there is some particular issue that comes up.
Right.
They are simmering.
Okay.
For instance, now there's a novel coming out in translation next week by a Mauritian author, and it's called Kaya Days. The translation is coming out in the U.S. next week.
I see.
And Kaya was he was a singer of the Sega, which is the Mauritian sort of song. That's a typical Mauritian song and dance.
Right.
And he was arrested on drug charges, and he died in jail. And that led to some rioting in Mauritius. So when you have these incidents, then these tensions come out in the open. So the reason I think we should address this issue is, if you don't address these issues, these tensions can flare up.
Right.
And that's not good for anyone.
I see. It's interesting that geographically and geologically you are first in the shadow of Madagascar.
Yeah.
Madagascar is in the shadow of Africa.
Yeah.
I'm not that I have a question about it. I was just thinking that it's closer to that part of the world than it's to India in many ways.
Definitely.
And does that distance show up in any way at all, even say in your thinking?
Well, geopolitically, Mauritius is Africa. In international fora, most often Mauritius I would say, is with Africa. We are active members of the African Union.
Right.
At one point, our Prime Minister was the President of the African Union. So we are very much an African country, geopolitically.
Right.
Now, culturally, there's a closeness with India. But then you can argue there's a closeness with France. as well.
Exactly.
See? So we are multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multilingual in a very deep way.
Right.
Yeah.
So, how would you differentiate between the Caribbean Indians and Mauritian Indians?
One, I would say the Caribbean Indians. I mean, I have been to Trinidad
Right.
quite a few times. I haven't been to Guyana. I've met Guyanese in here. And I've met a few Indians actually in Barbados.
Right.
But the first thing that's striking is that they are Anglophone. And we Mauritians, even Mauritians of Indian origin, we don't think of ourselves as being just Anglophone. We think of ourselves as being Francophone, Anglophone, multilingual. That's major difference. Second, I think that in the Caribbean, it's not clear whether whether they are in the majority or minority, and you do feel that there are many more, for instance, Guyanese in Canada and in the U.S. Many more much more emigration has happened there.
Out of that, that's true.
Yeah, and I think it's in Mauritius, because we are the majority. We feel we are Mauritians.
Right.
However, culturally, still I see a lot of Hindu traditions in the Caribbean. There's one thing I have to say on the culinary side. I've been to India quite a few times and Pakistan, but in the Caribbean and Mauritius have one thing in common. This dal puri,
yeah,
right? Which I haven't seen in India.
Yeah, but I mean, it's from a different time.
No, I haven't. My explanation is, it goes back to your questions about indentured labor. Our ancestors were given a ration of rice and dal, and they had to maximize. So that's how the dal puri came about.
Yeah, it's like the southern cuisine in the U.S. The way they use every part of an animal and to create a whole different flavor. It's because they had no choice other than doing that. I suppose it's the same logic here. Has anyone approached you optioning your book for a movie? That would be quite an irony, right?
I'm waiting.
Okay.
Do you know anyone in Hollywood or Bollywood?
Well, I used to know a lot of them.
An Indian author, Jenny Bhatt, right?
Right.
The way she read the book, she said it reads like a, it could be very.
It is cinematic. Yeah, it can be cinematic. Yeah. What next? Are you already on to something else?
While I was waiting for getting an agent and getting published, I was working on a novel dealing with the slave rebellion in Mauritius, complete fiction.
Yeah.
And I also started writing poems for a poetry collection.
I see.
And I have the third item. I have a memoir about my daughter.
Oh,
so these are the three.
So you're busy.
So not much time left.
No, that's wonderful. I'm glad you're keeping it ticking. This has nothing to do with our interviews. I'm very curious. I was born in Ahmedabad in Gujarat.
Oh.
Growing up, I used to hear street vendors shouting Moras keri being mangoes.
Yeah.
My vague memory is that Moras in their mind came from Mauritius.
Really?
Are there mangoes? Yeah.
There are mangoes in Mauritius, yeah.
No, I think it's to do with the fact that they were particularly sweet, and given Mauritius's well-known sugarcane industry, they somehow mixed it up. But I'm not sure if there is a variety of mangoes in Mauritius which is distinct at all.
I think the mangoes in Mauritius probably came from India.
Exactly.
I mean, that's another subject I have to research on. I think mangoes came from India.
Yeah, I'm sure, because 60-70% of all varieties happen in India anyway. So Mangoes are an Indian fruit in most senses of the word.
I grew up with mangoes. We have mangoes in the family home.
I know, interesting.
Yeah.
And to wrap up, how frequently do you travel to India, and where in India do you travel to, if at all you do?
Well, I used to while I was working for the World Bank and IFC. I used to travel quite often.
I see.
But my last visit, I'm afraid, days back, long time ago. So a visit to India is overdue. Last time I was there was 1996.
Oh, it's been a
Diwali of 1996.
Oh, things have dramatically changed in India.
Oh yes, I am sure. Yes.
Yeah.
So
No, this is wonderful. I'm so glad we got connected.